The helicopter blades thundered above me as dust and sand whipped through the alley. My gloves were slick with sweat, my pulse steady only because years in combat zones had trained me to survive chaos without flinching. A frightened little boy clung to my hand while my team rushed civilians toward the convoy trucks. Another extraction, another family trying to outrun violence. Then my satellite phone vibrated against my vest. I almost ignored it. You don't answer personal calls in the middle of an operation, not unless something inside you whispers that the world you left behind is suddenly collapsing. I answered. "Mrs. Carter?" A woman's voice asked, trembling. "This is St. Francis Children's Hospital. Your daughter is in critical condition." Everything around me disappeared. The convoy, the shouting, the heat, gone. I stopped walking. "What happened?" I asked, though part of me already feared the answer. The nurse hesitated. I heard papers shuffling, machines beeping somewhere behind her. "Your husband's new wife brought her in," she whispered. "She said your daughter fell, but the injuries, they don't match the story." A cold pressure spread through my chest. "Has the police been called?" Another pause. "Yes, but the detective refused to investigate. His chief is her brother." For one long second, the war zone around me felt safer than home. Then the nurse lowered her voice even further. "If you want the truth to survive," she said, "you need to come now." I turned to my second in command and handed him the operation file. "You're leaving?" he asked. "My daughter needs me." "That breaks protocol." I looked him straight in the eye. "Then protocol can file a complaint." Within 20 minutes, I was on a military transport headed across an ocean. The entire flight, I stared at the map glowing in my lap. 6,000 miles between me and my child. 6,000 miles for powerful people to bury evidence. 6,000 miles for lies to become official reports. But systems only work when people stay quiet. And I was done being quiet. When I landed, the city air felt heavy and unfamiliar. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. I walked straight from the airport into a waiting SUV and headed to the hospital. The nurse met me in the hallway. One look at her face told me everything. She led me into the room without speaking. My daughter looked impossibly small beneath the hospital blankets. Machines hummed around her bed. Bruises darkened her arms. A thin bandage crossed her forehead. I reached for her hand carefully, terrified even my touch might hurt her. "Hey, baby," I whispered. "Mom's here." Her fingers twitched weakly. The nurse handed me a sealed evidence bag. "These were the clothes she arrived in," she said quietly. "I documented everything before anyone could interfere." I looked up sharply. "You risked your job for this?" She shook her head. "No child should depend on silence to survive." Before I could answer, the door opened. My husband's new wife walked in wearing a perfectly pressed coat and an expression that looked rehearsed. "You're finally here," she said smoothly. "We should talk before this gets out of hand." I stood slowly. Every instinct inside me sharpened. "No," I replied. "What's going to happen now is very simple." I pointed toward my daughter. "You're going to explain exactly how she got hurt." Her calm expression cracked for just a second. "You don't understand how complicated this is," she said carefully. I stepped closer. "No," I said softly. "You don't understand how dangerous a mother becomes when someone hurts her child." She left 10 minutes later without another word. The nurse waited until the hallway cleared before slipping me a folded piece of paper, 3 phone numbers. "People you can trust," she said. The first belonged to an investigative journalist, the second to a federal prosecutor. The third was someone my former father-in-law knew personally. That surprised me most of all. My father-in-law had always been a quiet man, career military, disciplined, reserved. But when I met him in a parking garage just before dawn, I realized something immediately. He already knew. He handed me a thin folder. Inside were documents, old reports, and statements from officers who had tried to speak up before and been ignored. "This goes deeper than one incident," he said grimly. "How long?" I asked. "Years." I stared at the pages in disbelief. Complaints buried, witnesses dismissed, patterns hidden behind titles and influence. My daughter hadn't stumbled into a tragic accident. She'd become trapped inside a system designed to protect the wrong people. That morning, we walked into a federal building together. No press, no dramatic speeches, just evidence. Hours later, investigators officially opened the case. And once they did, everything started moving fast. The detective who ignored the hospital call suddenly stopped answering reporters. Internal Affairs arrived at the police department. The journalist published the first article by sunset. Questions raised after child injury case linked to police leadership. The city exploded. By the next morning, my husband was standing outside my gate, asking to talk. I watched him through the security camera and never opened the door, because suddenly, everyone wanted to explain themselves. But explanations arrive very late when power starts disappearing. 2 days later, federal agents executed search warrants. The police chief was escorted out of his home in handcuffs while neighbors watched from their lawns. No sirens, no spectacle, just consequences. My phone buzzed nonstop. Friends, former colleagues, reporters, people who once defended them now claiming they always had concerns. Funny how courage appears after headlines do. The hardest moment came during the preliminary hearing, not because of the lawyers, not because of the media, but because I had to hear recordings I never wanted to exist. One captured conversation revealed exactly how certain officials planned to suppress the case before it gained attention. Another revealed the chilling confidence of people who believed their family name made them untouchable. The courtroom fell silent. For the first time, nobody could hide behind status anymore. Only facts remained. My husband sat rigid beside his attorney, staring at the table. I didn't look at him, not once, because this stopped being about betrayal a long time ago. It became about rebuilding safety for my daughter. Weeks passed, charges expanded, careers collapsed, people resigned before they could be fired, and slowly the truth surfaced piece by piece. The detective lost his badge, the police chief lost his position, others followed. But victory didn't feel dramatic, it felt quiet, like finally breathing after holding air in your lungs for too long. One evening, months later, I stood in the kitchen making tea while rain tapped softly against the windows. My daughter walked in wrapped in a blanket, still sleepy from a nap. She leaned against me gently. "Mom?" she whispered. "Yeah, sweetheart. You kept your promise." I swallowed hard, because I remembered the promise I made beside her hospital bed while machines beeped around us. Nobody will ever silence your truth again. I pulled her into my arms carefully. Outside, the storm continued. But inside our home, something had finally changed. Not revenge, not triumph, freedom. People often ask me now how I found the strength to fight back against powerful people. The truth? I didn't feel strong. I felt terrified. But courage isn't loud the way movies pretend it is. Sometimes courage is simply refusing to look away. Sometimes it's documenting evidence when everyone tells you not to. Sometimes it's standing in court while your hands shake. And sometimes it's boarding a plane from a war zone because your child needs someone willing to become impossible to intimidate. The systems that failed my daughter depended on fear, on silence, on exhaustion. They expected me to accept the official version and move on quietly. Instead, they forced me to become the one thing they never prepared for: a mother with proof. Today, my daughter sleeps peacefully again. The nightmares faded slowly, but they faded. She laughs more now, draws again, trusts again. And every time I hear that laughter echo through our home, I remember something important. Justice isn't about destroying people. It's about protecting the vulnerable loudly enough that nobody can bury the truth ever again. Some wars happen overseas. Others happen in courtrooms, hospitals, and quiet homes where fear hides behind respectability. But this time, fear lost, and my daughter got her future back.